So I'm going to ask for your indulgence in case we start flipping through slides like we're flipping through a book, because my finger is probably going to hit the wrong arrow a couple of times. Also, too, I realize we have a schedule, so I'm going to ask my partner, Ed Elam, to kind of keep me on point as we talk about the scintillating subject of drug and alcohol reviews. And he's reminded me I'm 15 minutes behind, so we'll see what we can do to get us back on schedule. We may have to cut out what he's talking about to make the schedule. But what I want to do is talk to you about some basics today. But first of all, just by way of introduction, my name is Ed Elam. I'm a planner by profession. I actually started my planning career here in Alabama. So I'm very excited to be back after about 30 years and a bunch of projects to be talking with you today. I've worked on all sides of transit, from planning and operations all the way to grants and other things. So I'm hoping that some of that experience is comparable to what you've experienced in your roles. But we want to talk about the rules and the regulations that are currently out there. And again, if you're dealing with drug and alcohol, you should already be aware of most of this. However, if you're on the FTA share list, you should have gotten an email this week, which was rather interesting, about potential changes, and we'll talk about that in a second. Also, too, we have some ideas of what we can share with you in terms of how some of your peers are putting this into practice. Because we realize some agencies are direct operators, some are contract agents, some actually are members of local government, whether that's a county or a city or a collaborative. So again, each of you has a responsibility because of your FTA funding. And then finally, the best thing about this is there's a whole bunch of free resources out there I want to share with you. And I understand the PowerPoint will be made available, so there's some live links in there that will take you to some items that you can look at to learn a little bit more. By way of hands, I like to ask a lot of questions. I have 3 fairly young children. We ask a lot of questions every day. So I'm just kind of curious about the audience today. I've seen most of your tags and most of the groups, but just how many operators do we have, or people who actually are in transit operations in the audience today? Okay. How about government, state, regional government, local government? How many folks from government? Okay. Any federal folks in the audience? That's good. So that way I can say what I want. So again, if you're familiar with FTA, they use a lot of words to basically tell us what it is we're supposed to do. But basically, we do have a responsibility to work with drug and alcohol regulations and do regular testing and evaluation of employees under a variety of situations. One of the things you can do, or I suggest, is start a binder, if you haven't already, with the current guidance. And that goes back as far as the original issuance of this information back in 1991. It's not bad to have it because, again, if questions are asked about how it is you've come forward with your program, it's always good to know where you start. And again, one of the things that came up in the last year has been just what are your testing thresholds for drug and alcohol. And probably the most important thing, and I'm not going to read from my slides, I kind of hit the high points so we can get on schedule, is to basically have a system that you put in place that's well-defined and to not over-test. Again, FTA is very specific on the thresholds of what testing you need to undertake. Just out of curiosity, how many folks here have actually gone and done a drug test or had employees drug tested? Show of hands. Okay, I'm in that number too, but funny story, I missed my very first drug test because they gave me the wrong lab. So I went to the address and it was closed and I missed my window. So again, it's important to know where it is you're going to test as well as when the testing should occur. And again, in transit, we basically are testing anyone who comes in contact with a rider, vehicle, or operations of service. And again, this is a very important group to remember. These are the folks who are your safety-sensitive employees. Basically, anyone who comes in contact with the public or anything that engages with the public. They should be considered as part of your random pool for testing for drugs and alcohol. And again, one of the things that's important is that FTA has defined the process and basically gives you some information. And I didn't have the, Brad, I didn't have the video, but there are a couple of good videos out there that you can look at that will give you 60 minutes of required drug-related training for your safety-sensitive employees if you're not currently using a vendor or somebody else. Very good resources here for you to take a look at. Again, supervisors, those who actually oversee staff, oversee operations, according to the guideline, should have 120 minutes of reasonable suspicion training. 120 hours, that would be quite extreme. Basically, again, this 120 minutes should be divided equally. Oh, did I repeat myself twice? Yes, I did. I guess it must make that important. A minimum of 60 minutes of training on physical, behavioral, and performance indicators of probable drug use, as well as the same for probable alcohol use. Yes, I will. Absolutely. And when you get the PowerPoint, these will be live links you can go ahead and look at. So you'll have the live links, and then I'll show you at the end, there's actually 4 websites you should keep track of that will help you with some resources. Let's see. And again, back to your question about videos, there are some videos available from FTA and RTAP that will help you understand what is reasonable suspicion and how to basically, as an agency, determine if there is cause for drug testing. One of the issues, of course, is making sure that you're not just randomly picking people, that you are randomly picking people, that you're not targeting employees and saying basically they're showing up on a random pool maybe once, twice, 3 times. In smaller agencies, sometimes that will happen. And again, I think there are allowances for that. But if you're a rather medium or large agency and you constantly are choosing the same employees over and over again, that could be considered a problem from the employee standpoint as well as from HR. Again, if you have someone who's coming in from another location, I realize labor is short. In the state where I am, there's a constant need for drivers and support staff, and COVID has kind of made it much more critical because you have folks who have left the workforce or folks that basically don't have the training that now have to come in, get CDLs and other things to be drivers. So you may find yourself working with people who are currently in possession of CDL or driver qualifications. You have the opportunity to grab their existing drug test information, making sure that you have to get a release from them in order to get that information. If they don't allow you the release to get their information, then basically FTA says they can't be considered for a safety-sensitive position. And I won't flip back to that slide, but the safety-sensitive positions are pretty long. Also, too, if they've given the consent and records are being transferred, and I realize not everybody is on electronic transfer. There's a lot of mail, a lot of hand carry stuff going on. You do have a period inside of which the employee can work while the records are actually being brought forward. Again, I'm a prime example. When I was hired by local government, I had to submit to a drug test before I assumed the position for which I was hired. And basically, I signed off a waiver as part of my personnel package that gave me the wrong lab to go to, by the way, as I just said. But I had to go in and submit to the drug test, and then I got my position once I passed the test. Same is true with your pre-employment. Basically, any applicant or any transfer should be considered tested before you bring them on board. And again, part of the indication of pass or fail should be in writing, as well as the pre-test notification. And that's something that you will get as an individual agency, and we'll talk about the handling of those records in just a moment. Probably the most common instance of testing that I've seen in my profession is when accidents occur. And one of the things we do at our firm is we offer state safety oversight for streetcars in 2 states. And one of the first things that happens is after an accident, an employee, if there's probable cause, will be sent for a drug test. Can't say that I've been involved in any fatalities, but in certain instances or certain accidents where it is an injury accident, one of the first things you see is a request to be sent for a drug test just to make sure that there was nothing in the system. And then one of the things that we see from the state safety oversight side is a summary of the report back about that the employee was sent for the test, that there was verification, the lab was contacted, the test has been administered, and results are pending for delivery to the transit authority. Again, random pool is something very important. One of the things FTA does is they actually give you a mechanism to come up with your own random pool. Just out of curiosity, how many folks are actually generating their own pool for testing and doing their own test administration? Anybody? Anybody using a vendor to do that? Vendors, who's using a vendor? Okay, sounds like a plan. We actually, in other states where I've worked, some actually do it. Some actually have vendors. Vendor process is kind of interesting because in itself, it has to be FTA compliant. And I know most of us make sure that paperwork is signed off when the vendor brings forward the report, that it meets all the criteria. It's all in the proper format, all proper information. So again, one of the issues is if you're creating your random pool list yourself, you actually have this resource which can help you do that. So at a recent transit conference we went to, there's basically a bunch of topics floating out there which are different and new, which need to be talked about in terms of drug and alcohol. The state that we were in actually had not legalized marijuana for recreational use, but was adjacent to a couple of states that did. And we'll put that issue aside for the moment. But one of the things that was brought up was that you have folks that are using medical marijuana for treatment of certain diseases or certain illnesses. Technically, they are not allowed to be doing that and basically driving or being in a safety sensitive position because it's going to result in a negative a positive drug test. And that's something that we need to be aware of. Also, too, some folks are using derivatives of marijuana for treatment of pain and aches and other things. One of the issues that's come up is that testing has found that some of that actually is in the system up to 30 days after administration. So CBD oils, the chewies and other things that you see on the market, if you have folks that are using those, it could actually put a blip on your drug test and come back as something that needs to be looked at. Also, too, some folks felt that during COVID, there was no reason to do drug testing because we weren't operating. We weren't providing door-to-door service. We weren't engaging with customers. And FTA's opinion was, no, that does not absolve you from the drug testing. If they're still employees of the agency, you should still be going through your regular protocols to maintain your drug test activity. Also, too, there is some proposed rulemaking out there looking at oral fluids, basically spit, as an option for you to actually administer drug tests. It's on public rule or public viewing right now. And if you're part of the FTA network, you should have gotten an email that says that's just been extended for 30 more days. And what that would do is provide another mechanism for the actual administration of drug testing beyond just the standard other sampling processes. One of the things that we also found in talking with some of our clients is that keeping records and keeping them secure is always an issue. So there is a process involved with you maintaining records over a 1, 3, and 5 year period so that if FTA comes in as part of their program reviews, they can see that you actually have, under due diligence, completed your necessary drug testing, you have documented the results, you're maintaining them in a safe location, you're keeping them up for all of your employees. And again, if you're using a contractor, the contractor should be providing you the necessary documentation that is put in your files and locked up so that if FTA comes in and does a program audit, they can see where everything is. So my question for the group is, have any of you participated in a drug and alcohol program audit? Has anyone come down and looked at your agency? Hands high. No shame in that. Okay. We actually went ahead and did a similar series of reviews in the state of Louisiana, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we learned in those in just a minute to provide you some ideas of some of the challenges we're seeing with the agencies over there. But basically, there's two ways to look at a program review. One is to come down and look at it as an opportunity to educate and inform about process and look for improvements. The other is to come down and say, with a ruler or a yardstick, and slap you on the knuckles and say you're doing everything wrong. We rather look at it as an opportunity to educate and inform, because there are always changes in policy, there's always changes in practice, in some of the nuances of the drug and alcohol record retention. There certainly aren't changes in the thresholds, although there may be changes soon in the methods based upon the current items under public comment. One of the things that's unique is that FTA actually has a self-certification checklist, which we'll provide the website link to that later, which can actually help you look at your own program in each of the 9 areas here to determine your level of compliance. It's a very generous self-guided questionnaire that asks you some very basic questions about what it is you're doing, what it is you could be doing and what it is you're not doing. And what that allows you to do is educate yourself on how is your program in terms of just general FTA compliance, and it will allow you to see what areas may need a little bolstering, but it'll also let you see what areas you're doing really well in. So one of the things that's important about this is that the FTA process actually covers all the tenets of the drug and alcohol testing. So as you work through each section, you're covering all the applicable sections of the current federal guidance. One of the things I'm going to show you in just a minute is that there are some background materials that go with each of these, which again, if you're interested in a little light reading, may help you in understanding some of these in a little more depth. So one of the things that we did is we actually contacted, with our Department of Transportation, 11 agencies across the state of Louisiana representing 5310, 5310, 5307, and 5311 joint applicants, just to kind of see, using the FTA checklist, how do they stand with drug and alcohol compliance. One of the unique things about this program is that some of these were standalone agencies. Some of these were compartments of local government. And one of the most interesting things about the compartmentalization under local government is that they found themselves calling their administrators, their civil service, their public works folks, wherever they were housed. So it became a much broader group of folks that were engaged in the discussion, which was really interesting. We spent about 90 to 120 minutes doing on-site inspections, and I'll tell you why on-site inspection is kind of important. And again, you can do this yourself. And then we also took the opportunity to share with them some resources to kind of help not only the transit provider understand when you sign the waivers and you sign the grant applications, which have all the various disclosures that you're going to follow FTA policy. We found that some of the administrative staff, some of the HR staff in some locations didn't quite understand that that was a requirement because they were focused on their local requirements or requirements that their government had put in place, not realizing that they were also obligated to follow FTA. And some of that was just simply education. Some of that was also change in staff. We know a lot of locations, people have retired, new people have assumed positions that maybe they were not in before. And that's been part of the OJT, or on-the-job training process, is to understand when you're a multidimensional government and you have grants and all these various programs, you have to know what each of these programs requires. So one of the things we found was that where they were not using vendors and they were doing their own random sampling procedure, they really didn't have a methodology describing how they were doing this. They were just basically going through and just making a check here, check here, check here. And it became a situation where in a couple of locations we saw the same people coming up time and time again. It became habitual. And we had to direct them towards some FTA regulation guidance and some FTA templates to help them do that random sample. They felt like they were being random because the same person was called every quarter, but that was one person out of 6 that was in their agency. It's like you gotta get beyond the one person. Also, too, we had some folks who didn't know the vendors they were using, didn't know the drug labs, didn't know all the details because it was handled by another department and there was not communication. It was very siloed. They basically gave a referral to their civil service board or their HR group, and they went off and did their thing and did not inform the transit group about what was happening. And again, that's a little dangerous because part of the process in this is communication at the upper levels to make sure you understand where did they go, what were the results, what's the implication for service. The other thing is, in some of the pre-employment screening, because there was a lot of job transfer between governments in Louisiana, some did not actually do the pre-employer screening and did not actually get records from other groups. Part of that was, again, COVID, not having people in the offices and people not communicating, or information going to folks who were no longer employed at the local government. So again, we helped them work through some of that process and gave them some takeaways, including, getting back on board with the current process and making sure that if you have someone in a safety-sensitive position, a driver, mechanic, that you've got all the records in order. Also, too, we found that some of the managers were new. In at least 2 positions, they were new to transit altogether. They had moved over from sanitation or they moved over from Parks and Rec, and this was like their first week or first month on the job. So we found they really didn't understand some of the basics of the reasonable suspicion. I'm not going to get that out. Reasonable suspicion training, and part of that was a lack of information on knowing where resources was, and part of it was a lack of understanding that reasonable suspicion wasn't that I think you did that, or I saw your pictures on Facebook that you were drinking on Bourbon Street last night, so I'm going to send you for a drug test today. No, it's not. It's not that simple. You have to understand it relates to the work at hand and where you're engaging with the public. The other item we found was security. A lot of the agencies did not keep things under lock and key. We actually had one agency that did everything by mail, including drug test results, and the mail actually went to the mailroom, was opened, pulled out, stamped with a stamp that said received, and then put back in the envelope and routed through the in-office mail. We also had some folks who were using electronic file transfer as well, but they weren't sure that the files were secured. In one case, the government was hacked, and their system held ransom. So basically, all of that information about the drug testing and the drug testing results and the employee records were basically part of that ransom pool. So there was a lack of understanding that you need to keep the information available, shown to only the handful of folks that need to see it, and then when it's in your office, keeping it in a file cabinet in a locked position. One of the best gotchas that we've heard from some auditors is they'll ask a staff, where's your drug and alcohol information? And they'll send the staff up to the cabinet, and the staff will open the drawer, and that's a gotcha because it should be under lock and key. So if anybody asks you where your drug and alcohol stuff is, you say it's in that locked cabinet over there. Don't open the drawer. So again, we talked about we're going to provide you some really good free resources. FTA has done a really good job in the last year and a half of bolstering its online resources for a variety of programs, including the drug and alcohol. So when you go to their general website, they give you a variety of tools that you can actually pull from that you can use to actually work on your program or to gain a better understanding of what the requirements are. Again, as I said at the beginning, keeping a 3-inch binder or 2-inch binder with some very important congressional documentation or program documentation is my way of doing it. And if I was to show you my binder, it's about two pounds of Post-its and highlighters inside of there to help keep me on track with what various things are. And that's not to say that I don't benefit from the online tool, because things kind of change at a rapid pace. Also, too, on some of the topic issues that have come up, FTA is actually identifying specific guidance papers, rulemaking opportunities for public comment, as well as final rulemaking, where you can actually go on their website and grab that information to have a better understanding. When they're finished with the oral fluids discussion this month, I'm pretty sure they will be posting something on this website that will tell you whether that's a permitted use or not for future testing. Also, RTAP has some really good toolkits, and we heard about that yesterday when we talked about other projects, marketing, and other things. There's a lot to be said for the manager's toolbox that they provide, because if you're just getting into this, it's a fairly detailed and developed toolkit that is relevant to your operation as a rural or a small provider. They also have a variety of information elements that are linked to them from a variety of states, as well as other federal groups. One of the best things that I saw on their website were these cards, which actually could be used with your staff to train them on drug and alcohol topics. One of the things that was suggested, and again, the link's at the bottom, so when you get this, and I've actually put some notes in this presentation on this particular page, is actually downloading and printing those and putting them in your employee areas on your employee board, because it will explain to them about the whole process of drug and alcohol testing, drug and alcohol use, prevention, and why it's important for them to understand why it is that they need to submit as part of the random process and basically respond to your asks of them. So just out of curiosity, I know we all say we use contractors. Has anyone used or seen any of these resources before from FTA or RTAP? Is this new information, or is this something y'all have been a party to already? Anybody using RTAP or FTA resources right now? Okay. Okay, for those of you that aren't, again, here's some good opportunities for you to gain some information. And with that, I think I might have put us a little bit back on schedule. All right. With that, we welcome your questions. If you don't have them now, or if you stump the speaker, we'll take them with us and we'll send back our responses after the presentation. With that, any questions? All right. Thank you. Oh wait, question.
I got one too.
Yeah. Oh, I can't walk past the screen.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't walk past this line because they won't see me. That's what I've been told. This is like the electronic dog fence. It pulls you back.
When you're talking on the random, do you check what times of day they send them for randoms?
The methodology does time of day, day of week, also does employee by name or by number,
But
I guess.
I'm saying, do you look at it, like say you're open from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m.
Yeah.
You should have a couple at 7, a couple at noon, a couple at 3, not everybody at 3 o'clock.
Exactly. Not everybody say between 1 and 5.
And if you're open on Saturday, you should have 1 or 2 on Saturday.
That's correct. And the other issue is if you run late hours, one of the things you should have is some coverage during the later hours, which in Louisiana presents a challenge in some of the rural areas if you need to send them for a test because some of the labs are closed in the rural areas at a certain time, so you have to drive them to the next city or make an arrangement for them to come to you, which is sometimes a challenge.
I just remember the last FTA review, they came in and checked what times you
Yeah.
sent people, and you need a pattern that not everybody goes at 3 o'clock when they get off in the afternoon.
And not the same person goes at the same time either. They have to be
Yeah.
they have to be caught a variety of times.
So I just remembering that from the last review.
What's that, JD? Oh, that's right. So JD reminded me in the previous slide, the FTA guidance on setting up your random methodology will help you with that time assignment also. It's actually an Excel spreadsheet, which if you enter the names, employee numbers of your employees, and you indicate, how many times you want to go for a test, it will actually do a random number generator across the hours of the day and give you a printout that you could then put in your files. And then that would be your backup to say, I sent this employee at this time, this employee at that time, that employee at another time.
I'm saying most agencies, they'll send them like at the end of the
Yeah.
day. Well, they send everybody.
Well, and in the government that I, and the government that I worked for, they sent everybody at 8 a.m. in the morning. And I'm surprised I couldn't find the lab because when I did find the lab, the line was down the sidewalk, out the room, and it was staff, it was all of the machine operators, it was police, it was fire, we were all in a line. And my question was what work got done that day because you had probably 100 people standing in line getting their either pre-employment, random, or return to work drug test all in the same time. And again, part of the issue too is timeliness. I know in an accident situation, you have only a certain amount of time to do a test. We see that in the reports that we deal with through SSO. In a pre-employment test, funny story, I had to take it a second time, as I said, because I missed the place. But then also, I missed the time window that they gave me for the test. Because again, when I got there, the line was so long, they said, well, you're going to have to come back another day. And again, as that added stress enough on top of everything else. And I was still able to work because I was under the rules of trying to get my stuff together for paperwork for civil service. But if you have an employee that's got to go out and drive that day, that's a lot of nerves to be on your mind that I've got to take a test at a certain time because I missed, because it's missed. To me, it creates extra pressure. Yeah, the curves.
Not everybody goes at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you have business on Saturday, you show a couple of them on Saturday.
Yeah. Any other questions? Gary, you had a question?
I was just asking about, I heard you mention it a little bit, but the collection centers. In Louisiana, do you have specialized collection centers just for the FTA drug test? Because I know in the past in Alabama, we've had to meet with collection centers and train them a little different. You can't just go to any collection center.
I'll tell you what I know based upon talking to the agencies. In the New Orleans region, we actually have one or two collection sites that actually are familiar with the FTA and the motor carrier's requirements and actually use the correct forms depending on the type of incident. In the next larger city, Baton Rouge, they also have a similar issue, but out in the surrounding areas, at least one agency we talk to has to go and actually talk to the lab and show them the forms, give them the information, give them the methodology. And their previous director had a relationship that actually allowed that to happen, and they had changed directors. So the new director was very surprised by our questions and very enlightened by the questions, and was able to then reestablish the relationship and get that information over to the lab because, and I'm not going to use a corporate name, but they were using a lab that did everything from blood tests to urinalysis for a variety of things to, drug testing for themselves. And they had to know, they didn't know, they just put everything on one form.
Yeah, you can't just use anybody. You got to use somebody that knows.
Yeah. And that's an issue, especially like in an area where there's not a lot of population.
Rural areas, yeah.
That's a constant complaint or a constant concern, yes.
Majority are not doing it correctly. But I know, me specifically, I know how to do a random drug test. I've been doing it for X amount of years, and I was audited, so I had the benefit of that. And and it turned out good because I was, according to your methodology, everything was good. But what I'd like to recommend, if you're not already doing it, is just do a basic spreadsheet, and that it indicates everything. The time, the day of the week that you sent them, of course the date, the day of the week that is, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the time of day you send them, what the results are. I mean, everything from start to finish. And I do that quarterly. So when, as BHS or Safety First, whatever they go by, as they send me that pool every quarter, that's what I'm doing. I'm plugging everything into the spreadsheet, and that does help keep up with, okay, I sent this last person on Thursday, the person before them on Tuesday. So if I have 5 pools, you better believe that I have every employee has gone a different day of those 5 days of the week, and also a different time of day. It's not always doable, depending on the number of names that are selected. Depending on the holidays that month, what's going on, you may overlook some stuff, but it is very easy and doable to make that happen. So I don't know what the FTA does. I don't doubt that some people were cited on that, but that's just basic. When you learn how to do it, you learn how to document. And another thing I would recommend, it's a great idea, is to color code stuff. If you want to color code your files, like blue indicates Tuesdays, yellow Wednesday, Thursday, and then you can just easily look at a spreadsheet, see the different colors, and you can see that pattern and see saying that, oh, I've sent a lot of yellows, which means I've sent a lot of people on Tuesday. We need to get some folks on green or blue or whatever. So just ideas.
No, really good advice. And one thing that we've heard and we recommend constantly with FTAs, if it's not written down, it does not exist. You got to document. And the other thing about preparing for the audit, and I've done several FTA audits as I said, with grants or on behalf of MPOs, using their language and citing their processes when they ask you the question gets them to move on immediately on to other things. Because if you can give them back what it is they're doing and saying, we're following the process as defined in 49 CFR, blah, 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 that's a perfect answer that moves you on to the next question. Now, having the documentation to back it up is the other part, but at least in the initial one-on-one questions, it gives them the confidence that you're following the program correctly with the documentation showing the proof of that. One thing that I found interesting too with some of the agencies was they didn't understand the need for securing the mail. As I said, when it comes in, and what they would do is they would have it addressed to one of the agencies that didn't use the mail pool had it addressed to the executive director, and the executive director didn't understand, well, why is it that it's a problem that my assistant opens the mail and stamps it in my office as opposed to the pool? Well, the problem is it's a breach of security of the results of the test. and you're sharing that employee sensitive information with others in the agency unknowingly, even though they're just opening the flap to put a stamp, it's just not secure enough.
See, my DER is located in a completely different office 30 minutes up the road. And so when they intercept the interoffice mail, they're like, they're doing what you're saying. They're pulling it out, they're stamping it received, and then it may go to the person that it was intended to go to. So what do you recommend in that situation if that is policy, commission policy?
What I've
Receive
seen
mail that way.
what I've seen us do when I've worked at agencies is just leave the envelope sealed and stamp the outside of the envelope, and then attach that to the item to put in the files. Also, too, a lot of folks are going to the electronic transmittal, which is eliminating the entire process of paper handling. And again, part of the issue is in the more rural areas, the lack of broadband access, lack of internet, lack of communication keeps that electronic file from transferring. But marking it as confidential, having an understanding in policy, a standard operating procedure in writing that's part of your drug and alcohol testing procedure that says it won't be opened, it'll be stamped on the envelope, envelope will be retained, gives you that documentation again. It's common sense, but it gives you the documentation to show FTA as part of your process. This is how we're handling the mail received information. And I'm sure JD's got some thoughts too.
Part of
So for those of you who didn't hear that, it's combine the SOP with training.
Well, again, they're not my specific staff that I oversee, so how lose control sometimes. So, yeah. But I can do what I can do, and that is say confidential, train, discuss, make sure they're aware.
Yeah.
And then after that, I can't control what's going on in another building, when they receive it. So.
No, and I think ultimately it's all about your due diligence, that you're taking the steps necessary. It's like assembly instructions. You can put them in a piece of furniture or something that needs to be put together. It doesn't mean you're going to follow it, but it's at least a due diligence feature that gives the person the opportunity to do it correctly. So again, you're providing that opportunity and that backup. Any other questions? With that, I'm going to yield the floor to JD. Thank you, everyone.